use the loss of power. I don't advocate crushing your enemy totally. I hope I don't have any enemies ever that I need to crush ever. You just need to know these things so that when you enter the work world, you're not naive, you're not stupid, you don't make the same kind of mistakes that I made. You spare yourself the pain. You understand the most fundamental thing about human nature. People have egos. Even your boss has an ego. You think he or she doesn't because they're powerful. They're even more insecure than other people. You need to be aware of these things so that you don't inadvertently make them feel insecure and suffer the consequences. So that's sort of my idea of power that I was trying to describe there.
The way you describe it is more of a sort of intrinsic force perception of yourself. When people think of power, they think of having control over others or their influence over others, but you've kind of made it more of a internal force.
Yeah, well, if you can't control yourself, then you're in a lot of trouble in this world, right? Because when you just naturally are yourself doing things, you're going to offend people. You learn early on we're social animals. I have to tailor my behavior, you know? If you go on babbling about how you feel and think, etc., and you just say what's the first thing on your mind, you're going to end up having a very, very short career. You're going to be saying things that are going to offend people. You're going to be making a fool of yourself. You're going to be saying things that you end up regretting, right? So you have no self-control. And if you see somebody who has no self-control, it makes you look like you're not powerful. If you can't control yourself, how can you control anything in your environment? How can you be a leader, right? So you have to learn certain things about your nature, about who you are, and not just be anybody. You have to kind of tailor your appearances as well. Because for good or for bad, I'm a believer in looking at the human animal without shame and embarrassment, just as we are, right? And appearances matter. It's the animal part of our nature. We judge people by how they appear, how they dress, their tone of voice, their body language, etc., etc. It would be, in an ideal world, we wouldn't judge people by appearances. We would just judge them by what's inside of them. Yes, I agree with that. But that we're not ideal. We're not descended from angels. We're descended from primates. So you have to understand that appearances matter. And this is part of the game. And so you have to control your appearances a little bit. You have to tailor it. You have to be a bit of actor in this world, on and on and on. You know, these are things that people don't like to admit about ourselves. We like to think that we're much more idealistic, that these things really don't matter in the end. And I wish it were that way, but it's not. And so I'm a bit more of a realist when it comes to things like that. But yeah.
As you were talking about this need to keep up appearances to some degree in order to survive and to fit into the tribes that we form in our lives, it made me think about how many guests I've had on this podcast who work in maybe the entertainment industry or other industries. Yeah. You know, they're famous, whatever, and they report that keeping up appearances had a really detrimental impact on their happiness and their fulfillment in life, because in some cases it meant that they were doing a job as a presenter and had to always be happy when inside they didn't feel that. And maybe the contrast of reality and perception caused them a lot of harm, or they've built a life around things that they're not interested in. I think you touched on some of that in Mastery.
Yeah.
That's the question I have, which is keeping up appearances and the impact that has on your happiness, i.e. wearing a mask, and happiness. What's the relationship?
I talk about it in the 48 Laws of Power, where you have to play this game in life. To me, it's a form of wisdom, which is, it's a wisdom that used to exist like in the 18th century. I read a book that had a big impact on me many years ago called The Fall of Public Man by Richard Sennett, in which he described like cafe life in London in the 18th century or France. And he was saying back then, when you entered the public arena or your cafe, you knew you were an actor. You left the house, you put on a mask, and you had fun. You know, you knew it was like fun. It was play. You know, when you're a child, You like playing games. You like putting on costumes. You like playing your parents or some character you saw on TV. It's part of human nature. We like to play these games. We're role players. We're actors. And he was saying in the 18th century, that was just a given in life, that when you entered the public realm, you knew you were an actor. And then when you went home to your wife, your family, or your husband, or wherever, you dropped the mask. You breathe a deep sigh of relief, go, now I can be who I am. Right? And it wasn't a problem. It didn't create neuroses. It didn't create this like, what's wrong with me? I don't know who I am anymore. So people now, the problem now is we don't have distance from that social realm. And so we think that if we're acting, that's who we are. But it's not. It's just that's part of being a social animal, is playing a role. You know, I did a book with 50 Cent, and he kind of exemplifies a lot of that. He plays a role in life. You know, when I met him, I thought, I was kind of intimidated. I was a little bit afraid. You know, the thug. This is a guy, when I met him, he was, you know, just a few years away from being shot and all this stuff. And I met him, and he was the nicest person in the world. He was almost kind of sweet. He'd hate it if I said that word, but he was sweet, right? He was very down to earth. He was very calm, etc. He's playing a role when he goes out and he plays that person. And he knows it. He knows it's like, he doesn't take it seriously. You know, he had this big beef with Kanye West back when I was doing the book with him. And then I met the two of them in Vegas when they were there for the awards. And they were like the best of friends. They were joking. It was just a game they were playing, right? So what I tell people is, we all are actors. Humans are born actors. We learn at a very early age to play that kind of game. It's kind of fun sometimes to do that, you know. Enjoy that part of life, but don't get it confused with who you are in your essence. That's sort of the dance you're playing between those two things. I understand what you're saying, and a lot of it has to do, as you said, related to mastery, where people end up in a career that doesn't suit them. And I think I understand what you're getting at. When I look at like presenters or people in the news, and they have to smile and be so cheerful, like, man, what a drag. I'd hate to be like that. You know, that is so false. Don't you want to take a shower after you being so cheerful and chatty and all that shit? You know, yeah, I understand that. But if that's the profession you chose and you love it, then maybe you don't feel that way. I couldn't do it personally. But, you know, I think it's okay to think of yourself as an actor. I don't think there's anything wrong about that.
The second very curious law in your book that I uncovered was law number 2. I'm talking about the 48 laws of power here, where it says, never trust friends too much. Learn how to use enemies.
Yeah.
Do you trust your friends?
Okay, well, everything in the book is context. So when you take things out of context, it's a little harder to understand. And what I'm trying to say in that, I'm talking about in the work world, when you're out in the social realm. And one of the worst things that people do is you have a job, and I've been guilty of it myself even after I wrote the damn book. You're out in the work world and you need to hire somebody. You need to find a colleague. You need to find a partner or an employee. Your mind naturally gravitates towards a friend, right? Because they know you, you trust them, you have a relationship, you know, and you feel comfortable with them. And it's a terrible mistake. So many of the worst things that have happened in history are because of that very problem. Because friends, there's all these emotions involved between people, right? And those emotions confuse the issue. So what I'm talking about in that law is when you need to get results, you need to think, when you have a job or something, you have to think in practical terms, not in terms of emotions, not in terms of friendship, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to keep your work world separate. It's not everything about life is having to be friends and having nice things and everybody like you. Sometimes what matters is getting results done. And sometimes the best person to work with isn't your friend because they don't have all this other stuff that we're talking about. In fact, a very powerful move is if there's an enemy out there, somebody who you never got along with, if you approach them and say, let's bury the hatchet, I have a job and I'd really like you to work with me. I know you're really smart. The turnaround of emotions is a very powerful thing where they're going, wow, yeah, sure, that's great. I never expected that. And they're highly motivated to now prove that they're worthy of your change of mind. So it's not about not trusting your friends in the realm of friendship in personal relationships. It's about being aware that the work world is different from the realm of personal relationships.
The other point I found really curious was point 3 about concealing your intentions. And I find this curious because I've never really known where to land on this when people ask me for advice on the subject matter about how much of your hand should you show, whether it's in business or life or whatever. There's a group of people that think you should always just keep everything you're doing and your intentions totally secret, because then people might copy you or they'll attack you or whatever. And then there's another school of thought that says when you're building something, when you're doing something, when you have a mission, you need to share it with as many people as possible, because that will galvanize people to come along with the journey with you, and they'll want to support you and help you. So when I read point number 3 about concealing your intentions, I wanted to ask you about what you think about that. Which side do you land on?
Well, everything depends on circumstances. So the laws are never meant to apply to every situation, right? So when it's with your own team and you're trying to inspire them and you're trying to give them a vision, you try to get them on your side, you share your vision with them. You share, this is where the group is going. This is where I want things to be in 3 years. Let's all get together. We're trying to do something very positive for the world. Okay, here's my plan, right? But then there are circumstances where revealing everything about what you're planning to do is actually very counterproductive, right? So the business world in the 21st century is extremely competitive. It's getting worse and worse by the day. As more and more people now are entering the power arena, and I think it's a great thing, where it used to be just a realm where only older white men had power, and now the doors have opened to everyone. The level of competition is that much more intense, particularly now even with the internet. You have rivals out there. You have competitors out there. Even as we talk right now, maybe you're not thinking about them, but they are. They're going to steal your ideas. They're looking to take your business away from you, et cetera, et cetera. Just be aware of that phenomenon. And just always saying what you're planning on doing isn't always the wisest thing to do. Sometimes, if you're in a tricky situation, putting people off the scent and giving them a red herring and saying, I'm planning to do this when in fact you're planning to do that. It's a very powerful technique. It's deception, but all's fair in love and war and business, I'm afraid. So, there are moments where you don't want to lay all your cards out on the table, right? You want to either create a little bit of mystery so that people don't know what you're going to do next and they're wondering what you're going to do next. And as they're wondering what you're going to do next, they're kind of on their heels a little bit. What's the next thing that Stephen is planning? I don't really know. Wow. It's a very powerful approach. There are other times and other experiences and moments in life where you do want to reveal what you're planning to do because there's a purpose behind it. I'm just saying, be aware. Don't just act in this world. Be aware. Have a strategic mindset. Sometimes concealing is what you need to do. Sometimes not concealing is what you need to do.
It's funny, when we have this conversation about power and the darkness and the shadows that people have in them, I think a lot of people listening, and probably it seems that way because I'm the one asking the questions, as if I'm questioning society that I'm not part of, they'll think they might think they don't play these games, right? They might, so that's the question I have is like, have you ever encountered anybody? Do you believe there's anybody out there that doesn't play power games, manipulation, have shadows, have darkness in them?
No, I don't. But so in my war book, I read the biography of Mahatma Gandhi, one of the saintliest figures in history, right? And I realized that Mahatma Gandhi was actually a brilliant strategist. Now, I'm not saying his use of nonviolence and civil disobedience didn't come from the heart. He didn't mean it. He didn't actually believe in the peaceful method. He did. It was very sincere. But he was very strategic about it. And he planned a campaign, several campaigns like the Salt March in the 1920s, where he knew, for instance, that the English public was very liberal-minded. They had this ideal of themselves as being this they weren't colonialists, they weren't imperialists, they were doing the best for the world. And he deliberately had these marches where he knew that they would be reading in their newspaper and seeing photographs of Indian people being beaten up by Englishmen and their Indian officers on the streets of wherever. It would have a terrible impact on the public. He thought in terms of strategy. Okay, so there's Gandhi. Then there's Martin Luther King, who's somebody I wrote about a lot in The Laws of Human Nature. Another great icon whom I admire, who actually was inspired by Gandhi and had campaigns of civil disobedience. And there was a campaign, I believe it was in Montgomery or Selma, I can't remember which one, where he was getting fed up. They weren't getting very far in the civil rights movement. They were reaching a stalemate, and he was getting very frustrated. And an advisor came to him and said, look, we're going to have this massive march, and I can get a lot of elementary school and junior high school students to be on this march because they believe in you and they're very fervent. And I think it would be great. And his advisors go, God, you can't do that. You can't put 13-year-olds at risk. And Martin Luther King thought about it very deeply. He said, no, we're going to go ahead and do it. Because, damn it, I want the American public sitting in there all fat and watching their televisions to see these brutal, Bull Connor, the police chief then. I want to see these children being water hosed and beaten, and it's going to have an incredible impact. He was being strategic, and his advisors were shocked by it, but it ended up proving to be one of the most pivotal, important moments in the civil rights movement. So here you have Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King was a flawed individual, as we know, right? He had a private life that wasn't exactly in the same as his public life. I don't judge him for that because he was a brilliant man, and I admire him. I love him deeply. Reading his biography made me even admire him even more, seeing that he had a human, flawed side to him. But these are icons that we set up, and they reveal what I'm talking about in human nature. You can't escape it. Yeah, maybe there was some saint born in some century that I've never heard of that maybe got pretty far away from everything I've talked about. But, we all have this idea, like in The Laws of Human Nature, I write about irrationality, envy, aggression, or narcissism. Narcissism is a good one. Oh, they're a narcissist. I'm not a narcissist. I'm not self-absorbed, but they are. Yeah. I don't have any of those traits. Well, damn it. Every single human being has self-absorption traits. We can't help it. We naturally think of ourselves first. Yes, there are people who are much deeper narcissists in life, no doubt, and there are toxic narcissists, but we all have a touch of it. I want you to be a little more humble in this world and not be so arrogant and not think that you are somehow exempt from having a dark side, that somehow you were born with a halo over your head, that you were born different, you don't have human nature, that you're a saintly person, you're much better. Get rid of your moral superiority, because I find that deeply offensive. We are all cut from the same cloth. We all have the same flaws. And when you look at yourself, and when I wrote The Laws of Human Nature, I'm going, damn it, Robert, you have a dark side. You're a narcissist. I had to come to terms with my irrationality, my grandiosity, my aggressive instincts. But it's the only way to change yourself is to be aware that you have these issues. I have the narcissistic tendencies. Now I see it. All right. Now when they pop up, I can control it better. I can say, damn, Robert, you're being too self-absorbed. You think more about the other person. But if you go around in life thinking, I don't have any of these problems, I'm not a narcissist, you're never going to have the awareness to stop the fact that you are actually one.
Being a narcissist, is that objectively a good or a bad thing? Because when you was obviously, I know people at home go, it's a bad thing, as a narcissist cause a lot of harm, and that's very true. But in the context of the human animal and why the human animal develops certain attributes and qualities to maybe further its survival or its ability to stay within the social pact, is it just a consequence of being a human to have these like shadow traits and to be coercive and manipulative? Is it good or is it bad? Or is it neither?
It's neither. Because it just is, right? So with narcissism, for instance, there's a reason why we're narcissists. So I explain in the book, it's not my own theory, it comes from some great psychologists like Kohut, the origins of narcissism, right? So when you have to leave you, when your parents have to kind of not abandon you, but have to not give you as much attention as you used to have, and you're 3 years old or 4 years old, you don't remember it, but it was very painful. Like, oh, they don't love me as much. What's wrong with me, right? You know, I have to get that love and attention, not just naturally, I have to do things to earn it, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens with a lot of people in that situation when you're a child is, I have to develop I have to be my own mother or father. I have to find a way of loving myself. When something bad happens, I have to retreat inward and go, I'm really not so bad at all. I'm actually a decent person. I like my own tastes. I like the clothes that I wear, et cetera, et cetera. You're developing the shreds of self-esteem, right? And people who never develop that because they were abused or they were abandoned or even if they were suffocated, never developed that self-esteem. And so what happens in life is if you don't develop that and you get older and people attack you and yell at you or criticize you, you can't retreat inward to that self-esteem, that love you have. The only thing you know is to get angry, they call it narcissistic rage, and to yell at people and say, God, get away from me, you're evil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And then the other problems evolve where the only way I don't have that inner self-esteem, the only way I can get people to love me is by being incredibly dramatic and overly dramatic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and always making myself the center of attention. That's what creates a deep narcissist. That's their only way of getting the love that they need. So children, we all need that degree of self-esteem, that anchor in our life. So narcissism, self-love, is not a bad thing. But what happens is as you get older, if you go too deep into it, it becomes a problem. And so what I say is you need to take that self-love and that has a good function and turn it outward as much as you can and turn into empathy and love and consideration for other people. That's your task as you get older in life. That's how I approach all of these flaws. You can't run away from them. You can't run away from your shadow, your dark side. You can make it work for you. You can make it positive and productive and healthy. You can become a healthy narcissist, which is a name that I use in the book. You can use your dark side for positive purposes. Let's say you have a lot of anger inside, and I had a lot of anger when I was younger. I was a very angry young man, right? Channel that into some kind of cause. I have a lot of causes that I believe in very deeply. And when I was younger, I was like that. Channel that energy into something productive and helpful and put it into something that goes to something that helps society. That's using your dark side for positive purposes. Because the dark side of human nature has a lot of creativity, has a lot of energy. An artist has to have a dark side. You use your dark side because all those dark emotions, all the people that shat on you in your life, they inspire you. They create your best work. Don't run away from your shadow. Don't run away from your narcissism. Use it in a healthy way.
And acknowledge it. I think that's the hardest thing for people to do, right?
Yeah.
So few people, I think, including myself, have really fully understood what their shadow and their dark side is. I mean, doing this podcast has really helped me because I learn things from other people vicariously, and then I reflect on myself, or keeping a diary has helped me to understand that. But that first step in someone having the self-awareness to understand their dark side, I mean, there's even a lot of people who confronting their dark side it feels like it would be so impactful on their self-esteem in a negative sense that they spend their life putting up a wall to never go there. I mean, there's some people who you even mention something to them and they would triggers them.
Yeah.
We can all think of those people. We can all think of those people. The really interesting thing there is the role that your early years play on your relationship with power. Because when I think about some of the nicest, I don't know if this is just a general a stereotype or a narrow observation I've had, but some of the nicest people I've met in terms of, being the opposite of whatever a toxic narcissist is, seem to have really comfortable, loving, secure, safe, early experiences. And then is that broadly true in your view?
It's a generalization, but there is some truth to it. I mean, there's things that are called attachment theories, where psychologists have looked at the kind of attachment you had to your parents, and they categorize it in 4 different ways. And there's the ideal, the best one, where you have this incredibly loving mother and father, and they're giving you unconditional love, but they know also how to give you your independence, etc. It's not terribly common. I don't know what the percentage would be. Then there's levels and levels, and as you get to the 4th level, it's like the abandonment one, or abusive and abandonment, where you basically leave the child alone. You don't give it any attention, any love, and it's very crippling, right? But the thing is, children are much stronger than we think they are. They're very resilient. They're very resourceful. They're going to find their love. They're going to find a way to compensate for it in some way. And what's something very interesting, when I was doing seduction in some of my other books, and I look at people who were like very charismatic, like a Malcolm X, like a Marilyn Monroe, I could go on and on and on. These are people that came from very, very bad families, right? They had no love. Marilyn Monroe was an orphan, essentially, raised in an orphanage. Her whole life was, I got to get people to love me. I need love so desperately. And her way of doing it was to literally make love with the camera. Nobody ever done that before. You could sense that she needed it, and it was so powerful that you sensed it, that she drew it to herself. Great charismatic individuals. John F. Kennedy is someone who had a lot of charisma. He came from a very bad childhood, right? His father was very mean to him, etc. Some children, in the worst circumstances, it ends up bringing the best out of them. They have to find their way in life. And some people who have everything don't go very far because they don't know how to find things for themselves. So life is weird. Some people who have great childhoods do well. Some people who have great childhoods are spoiled and never learn how to get things on their own. And some people who have the shittiest childhoods learn how to be resourceful and get what they need on their own.
You mentioned seduction there, the art of seduction. Why did you write a book about the topic of seduction?
Seduction is a high form of power because you make people feel pleasure. You make them feel excited or interested in you. And then their resistance to your ideas slowly lowers, and you have the ability to influence them and to move them in the direction that you want. If you yell at them, like how we were talking about your child, and you tell them, do this, do that, they resent it, and for good reason. But if you're subtler, if you're more seductive in your approach, if you're more indirect, people will do what you want or go in your direction without ever even realizing it. So it was a sub-theme in the 48 Laws of Power. And so I was sort of interested in the psychology of that and why some people are good at it and some people are awkward about it. So when I finished the 48 Laws of Power, I thought this would be a natural segue, the next book.
What are the qualities of a great seducer?
Well, I like to distinguish between cold seducers and warm seducers. A cold seducer is something you don't want to be. That's the typical image that we might have of a male seducer, but even of a female seducer, like the great courtesans, etc., where they're just after money or the men are just after sex. That's not my ideal. My ideal is kind of a back and forth quality where it's not domination. It's sort of like a game that you're playing. It's like a mating game. It's like a courtship ritual where both people are kind of seducing each other. And so what makes for a great seducer is very simple. I can summarize it very simply. You are outer directed. So when you meet somebody, for the first time, or you're on a date or whatever it is, you're not having that internal monologue going, does she like me or does he like me? Am I dressed well?